Welcome to the Core Outdoors podcast. My name is Christian Rawls. The aim of this podcast is to provide insights and inspiration to those of us working in the outdoor industry. From startup founders to seasoned CEOs, designers to sales reps, we're working together and learning from each other along the way. This podcast is a production of CORE, the Kootenay Outdoor Recreation Enterprise. CORE is a nonprofit organization based in the Kootenay region of British Columbia. CORE's mission is to support the outdoor industry here in BC. Thanks to those who have reached out online and in person to me about the podcast. Appreciate the feedback and the support. If you'd like to get in touch and recommend a guest or give a suggestion or just say what's up, you can email me now, coreoutdoorspodcast@gmail.com. That's coreoutdoors with an S, podcast@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. And while we're on the topic of feedback and support, here's the one ask I have on this ad-free podcast that you're about to enjoy. If you're not subscribed to the show, please take 4 seconds to do that now. If you haven't hit the review button yet, that would be great too. But better yet, if you have a friend or two that you think would enjoy listening to this show, send them a text with a link in the episode. That's what they call a win-win-win. Today's conversation is with Cam Brensinger, the founder and CEO of NEMO Equipment. Cam launched NEMO days after finishing his degree at the Rhode Island School of Design. And through the help of a dedicated team, he has grown NEMO to be one of the most well-respected and recognizable brands in the outdoor industry. We get into the backstory of the adventures that led Cam to launching NEMO, and then we get into the process that he's used to continuously bring innovative products to market. One thing that stood out to me in this conversation is how Cam is bringing his design philosophy for creating innovative products that are durable and sustainable into building NEMO to be an independent, family-owned brand that will continue for decades to come. Get ready to take notes, because Cam has some wise words in this one.
Wow, that really kind of brings me back to being a little kid in Manchester, New Hampshire, where I grew up, exploring the surrounding neighborhood on my little BMX bike with my buddies. There were a couple of patches of woods. And it's funny because, as we all say, like my memory for when I was a kid was they were miles away and they were enormous. And, my dad still lives in Manchester. I visit Manchester. I know now that the scale of that is not very big, but yeah, we'd go wandering off through those woods and discover little things. There was some land out behind where I ended up going to high school that was just kind of open woods with a few trails. And there were some abandoned cars and random things back there. I stepped on a hornet's nest at one point. So, those were my earliest adventures.
Yeah, it's amazing how those small green spaces around where we grew up have such impactful staying power in our lives. Yeah.
So true.
I know you're a man with who've experienced all sorts of different adventures throughout your life. So there's one particular one that I'm really interested in. From what I understand, you went on a trip with some friends up to Denali right after university, and that may have been the place where some seeds were planted for the future of NEMO. So I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about what happened on that trip and if there were seeds that were planted.
Yeah, for sure. So I went to Middlebury College, a small liberal arts school in Vermont, which really cemented a lot of my outdoor passions. That was my chance with friends to learn how to rock climb and ice climb and do some more mountaineering and stuff. So by the time graduation was approaching, we were looking for this kind of culminating event together as outdoor buddies. And the obvious place to pick was Denali. Various of us had done semesters abroad, and a friend had climbed Aconcagua, another one had climbed Mount Aspiring in New Zealand, and so we thought I had been on Rainier, and so we thought this would be a great capstone, if you will. And in fact, it was my only plan for after graduation, which is funny looking back. But that year, which was 1998, was an El Nino summer. And there was an unusually high dumping of snow on the mountain. And we were there, just 4 buddies, no guide, to do the West Rid. And we ended up, flagging it ourselves, kind of breaking trail on it. If there had been anyone there before us in the season, it wasn't apparent. I mean, there were no tracks kind of from the 14-3 camp. And we had a lot of challenging circumstances, the saddest and most sobering of which was 2 people actually died while we were on the mountain. And we watched their removal of their bodies while we were there, which was pretty terrible. But on summit day, basically, we made a high camp on the Birchen on West Red. get up the next morning after 2 weeks of no visibility. We had clear, beautiful skies, and I thought, this is it. We're all going to summit. This is great. I was in a great mood. And we started kind of breaking trail on summit day. And my vision I'd had headaches and some altitude adjustment issues the whole trip, but my vision just started to shrink. And the only time in my life this ever happened, shrink into this little tunnel and, like blackness around. And the picture through my eyeballs was just getting smaller and smaller to the point where I had to call it and say, guys, I don't think I can go any further. I don't know how close we were to the summit precisely, but it was within, say, 2 hours of walking, which translates to pretty short distance. And then I turned around, they roped me up, and we're kind of making our way back to the 14-3 camp. I dropped my water bottles one point, and I remember watching it kind of tumble down the mountain and bounce and go off this cliff and just vanish, and thinking, I don't want that to be me. And moments later, I stepped into a crevasse, both legs punched through, my pack got wedged. And to make the rest of a long story short, I ended up leaving a lot of my fuel and food with my buddies and agreeing to kind of meet back in Talkeetna. From the 14-3 camp down, there was enough traffic both ways. I figured I can safely get my stuff down. I'll give those guys what they need so they can make an attempt on the West Buttress. And sure enough, I go around Windy Pass and goes total whiteout conditions. I end up setting up my tent to kind of wait till I can see the next warrant on the trail. And each of us had brought a book on the trip. I don't remember what I brought, but it was a fun book to read. I had finished it, and so had one of my buddies, and so we traded, and he brought Into the Wild, Krakauer's book about Chris McCandless going to Alaska and starving to death. And I'm in my tent by myself in total whiteout conditions with very little fuel now, which translates to water, and very little food because I've given a piece. Reading Into the Wild, and I'm thinking, it was basically the low moment of my life. Certainly up till then, I had gone into that trip with my buddies thinking I was kind of the tough guy, the least likely guy to have to turn around. And I'm 20 something years old. I'm ego driven, testosterone driven. And here I am lonely in my tent, wondering if I'm going to make it. Later on, by the way, the plane I was supposed to be on crashed right in front of me. So that wasn't even the end of the adventure. But that was a hugely humbling experience. And I think the big takeaway for me was I'm okay with risk. Like I've enjoyed a lot of risky things, including starting a business since then. But I think what I failed to do with that trip was really think it through beforehand and think about what the consequences might be and then deliberately face those. And so kind of my vow to myself in that low moment in that tent was, like if I get through this, I'm just going to be more thoughtful in the future, put myself in a dicey spot. It's going to be because I knew that was a risk and I knew what I was getting into and it was worth it.
Wow. It's an amazing story. Good experience for sure. So after that trip, at some point, you decided to go to the Rhode Island School of Design. And in our previous conversation that you and I had, you had mentioned that while you're there at art school, you learned how to take criticism. And that's something that really stood out to me. Just talk a little bit about what that experience is in school, receiving criticism, and then how that transfers into the work that you've done since then.
Yeah. Well, first I'll say RISD and art school in general was a gift that I didn't totally appreciate while I was there. It took some years out, like so many things that happened to us in life, to kind of getting out into the world to appreciate how special place it was in terms of you could do anything, wear anything, say anything, be anything. And that was okay in art school for the most part. I mean, I'm sure some people had some challenges, but compared to my experiences up till then in life, it was the most liberating environment I'd ever been in, which is a tremendous unlock for kind of whatever your inner potential is. And so that was a huge gift. One of the things kind of corollary to that that I took away was what you're getting at, and that was, when we would present a project, let's say we're tasked with designing something, you've got a week, next Thursday, there's going to be a critique. You'd have to take that work and pin it on the wall and be subjected to a group of people kind of tearing into it. And I'd never experienced anything quite like that. And I think inevitably at first it puts you on the defense. Your ego kind of gets in the way, and you want to make excuses and defend everything you did, and kind of treat this work you did as precious. But you learn pretty quickly that if your goal is to make the best thing you can, that you actually want to check your ego and really listen and try to absorb those different perspectives. That there's a huge opportunity in all of that to move your work forward, to kind of bring a collective consciousness, a collective intelligence to it instead of just your own. And I took that to NEMO. Again, I think that was just a huge gift to have that experience. And that's been a really important part of our culture and success here.
When you were at RISD, were you thinking about outdoor products? Is that something that you were working on? Is that something that drew you to RISD in the first place? What were the projects that you were interested in at that time of your life?
Yeah, the short story is, as I mentioned, I went to a small liberal arts school first time around out of high school. I studied physics, creative writing, and studio art, which, it's not real obvious how you'd sort of link those together in a career necessarily. I'm sure my parents questioned that a few times. But when I got out of school and came back from Denali after doing a couple other random experiences trying to figure out what I wanted to do in life, I sketched out a really rudimentary business plan and showed it to my dad one day, who was a career architect, ended up running an architecture firm. So he was sort of adjacent to this. I mean, he was in this design space. He was sort of adjacent to the space that I'm in today. And after he read the business plan, instead of telling me how terrible it was, because it definitely was a terrible business plan, he said, well, you should check out industrial design. And when I went online, I'd grown up doing fine art. And so I knew about RISD as a great art school. When I went online and saw what RISD's industrial design program looked like, the pictures of the students' work, and it was just like, that is what I need to do with my life. That's the thing I've been looking for. And in retrospect, those tuition dollars at Middlebury weren't wasted either, because, the way we've used industrial design here involves a lot of physics, a lot of creative writing, and of course, a lot of art. It was a lucky thing that it kind of all tied together.
And was that business plan, did that eventually turn into NEMO? Is that what the business plan was for?
Yeah. So basically I talked RISD into letting me enroll and basically went back to college, so I could have applied to either the undergrad or graduate program, but when the admissions folks explains, the graduate program is sort of a guided 2 years of doing work on your own, more or less. The undergrad program, you'll learn prototyping and woodworking and metalworking and design fundamentals. It was like, I need all those skills. I basically went back through undergrad, and the whole time I was there, now I was on this mission to start NEMO. So every chance I could, I would design outdoor gear. I actually interned at Black Diamond Equipment after my first year, which was an amazing experience. It's just totally eye-opening, educational, enlightening experience in so many ways. And then started NEMO 3 days after grad. Took my business plan and evolved my business plan as my senior project. So my senior project at RISD was really to get the company going, incorporated spring of my senior year, and then moved into our first office 3 days after graduation.
Wow. So what were the first couple products that you were working on at RISD? Was there one that you were like, this is the problem I'm here to solve? Or were you playing with a bunch of different things?
Played with a bunch of different things. I had to sort of oftentimes stuff a square peg into a round hole, because the project might have a set of parameters, design a small handheld device, but it wouldn't be necessarily an outdoor piece of gear. And I would take that opportunity and design, for example, on my shelf here, I have a kind of an improved rock drill for big wall climbing or canyoneering that I probably did in a class where most of my classmates were drawing cell phones, you know what I mean? So I would kind of squeeze outdoor gear into stuff. But the product that ended up being, sort of the foundation of NEMO was in that senior project, in my kind of senior thesis project, I ended up settling on trying to create low pressure inflatable tents as NEMO's first products. And so spend a bunch of time my last trimester working on that.
So I've heard that there's a story of you on Mount Washington having maybe a rough night out, we could call it. That was an impetus for kind of propelling you into NEMO even further. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, that's right. So, a buddy and I planned to climb Huntington Ravine, ice climb Huntington Ravine. I think we were going to climb on a Saturday. And so we thought we'll get a jump on the hike in and head up Friday night. And of course, being young and cocky, we didn't bother to scrutinize the weather forecasts. And we arrived at Pinkham Base on the eastern side of Mount Washington, and the weather's fine, and kind of head up the trail, and this big storm comes over the mountain, and we end up, not that it was especially dangerous, but we're dug into the side of the mountain, just having your typical miserable night in a bivvy. And the challenge in a bivvy bag without any kind of structure is you're trying to arrange the fabric so you're shielded from the wind and the driven snow and stuff, but you're not suffocating. And so all night I'm kind of tinkering with this bivvy bag. And of course I'm in design school, right? So I'm picky about every designed thing around me, real judgy about every product thing. And so I'm thinking to myself, this bivvy is just the worst design. Like, there's got to be a better way. And somewhere in the middle of the night in the thought process, I thought, man, if it just had this little inflated rib in it that just kept the thing off my face, it could be very quick to set up, very small packing. And that was the seed of the idea that became our air supported tents over the next years.
Wow, great. I love that. What's that? Necessity is the invention, or the mother of invention. So good. Yeah, that's great. And so what were those early days? So like you said, 3 days after graduation from RISD, NEMO is off into the races. What were those early days like? Like, how many people were in the office, and how were you funding it? And what were the projects that you were working on?
Yeah. Well, in the very beginning, I started the company with my best climbing buddy, but his expertise was more on the business side, mine was more on the product side, and there was just no business really to be done for a while. So he ended up going back to school and becoming a successful attorney. So 6 months in, I was alone and stayed that way for a little bit until I called my mom one day and said, "Hey, Mom, I've always watched you pay the bills and kind of run the households, really expertly. Any chance you would drive down to NEMO?" We were about 30 minutes south of where my parents lived, and just go through our bills and help pay the bills here, or do some of the basic bookkeeping. And of course, being a wonderful mom, she said, yeah, absolutely. So she was unpaid for about 10 years, but I guess technically my first employee.
10 years, Cam. Come on, their mom.
Yeah, it's shameful. I know. Well, my parents did, making a bigger story short, they did end up investing a little bit of money in the business a couple of years in. Actually, quick little side story. We had run out of money. We couldn't make money fast enough as design consultants. We did a bunch of consulting to kind of keep the lights on as we worked through our prototypes and stuff, but we were getting to the point where we were ready for production and needed some more capital. And so I kind of did the circuit of angel investors in New Hampshire and rounded up about half a dozen angels with a lead investor who were interested to invest. And one day I'm driving with my dad, coincidentally, somewhere, and the lead investor calls and says, "All right, Cam, we're in, we're ready." And I don't remember the dollar amount, but it was modest compared to what we ended up needing over the years. Very modest investment for about a third of the company, which honestly, if we had done that deal, I think we wouldn't have survived, because there wouldn't have been enough equity left to raise the funds that we ultimately needed. But I get off the call with my dad, all proud and excited, and I tell my dad the story, and he says, "Well, Cam, I'll tell you what, since you were able to convince them, your mom and I, really proud of what you're doing. We think you can make it work. We'll do that investment, but we only need this stake in the company." And that turned out to be just another tremendous gift in the journey, because it bought us a little bit of time to learn some more. And then eventually, a couple of years later, when we did a bigger growth equity investment, we had more to give away without giving up majority. We've never given up majority ownership of the company. which has allowed us to kind of run things the way we want to run it. But there was a little bit more there to offer to investors.
And just because my curiosity is piqued, were those future rounds friends and family, or did you go to more institutional?
No, those were outside of the family, but they each had their own stories. Early on, we attracted a major player in our industry, took a small minority investment from them, but some real cash, and later bought them out. And then another round was actually the family of a friend of mine turned out to have a multi-generational legacy business that they had sold and had some capital. We later bought them out as well. But it took, my original business plan said that the $7,500 that I had to my name that I put in NEMO when I started my senior year in school would turn into a profitable business in 6 months. It took over $10 million of investment in 12 years to be profitable. So that tells you how much I had to learn.
Wow. Yes. I don't understand at that level, but that is a very true sentiment that I've heard many people say that, yeah, I guess maybe similar to that Denali experience. We think it's going to be one thing and we're not really prepared for it to be a whole nother thing.
Yeah. And I think there's really something in that that's instructive too, Christian, maybe beyond the pale. I've been asked, well, first of all, I'd say when I was starting NEMO, I had friends from college who went off into various careers straight away into being a professional, making a good paycheck, who said to me, why don't you you're crazy. Why don't you start this thing on the side, spend your evenings, do it, but on sort of someone else's dime. And first of all, I don't think that would have been possible. Like just looking back on this journey and how much there was to learn and solve and just do, I think it's this game that we've played, this journey we've taken has been all or nothing. Anyway, there may be many other paths where that would be viable, but I think for us, this was all or nothing. But I think also another thing that I, of course, didn't understand as I went into it, couldn't possibly have sort of seen in those early stages, is that I had a lot of bravery that kind of came from ignorance of not knowing really what I was getting into. And, when I talk to other entrepreneurs now or people starting businesses, a lesson I try to impart from my own experience is you cannot plan an adventure like this from A to Z before you get started. There are going to be so many unforeseen twists and turns and challenges, things you're going to learn, ways you're going to grow. It is not, you don't have enough information at the outset to make this roadmap all the way to the finish line. And so if you require that of yourself, you're never going to do it. Or you may go in with some really wrong expectations or some really fixed way that you expect things to go. It's not, I had this plan. Why isn't it my plan? That prevents you from learning and evolving. I look back and I think if some entity had come down out of the sky and said, Cam, you're going to need 12 years and 10 plus investment, would I have had the guts to go for it anyway? I don't think so. I don't know, but I doubt it. And I'm sure glad I did, and so I think the key is you want to have sort of a vision of the outcome that you're seeking. You want to have a set of guardrails, a set of rules that you're going to play by, like your values, your vision, your values, and you want to build a great team of people around you. But beyond that, I think, and let's say you want to plan out maybe A, B, C, and D, like the things that are out from here to the horizon that you can see. Great idea to work through. Okay, when we do this first thing, then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. It's always good to have a plan, even if it's a crappy plan. But I think you want to leave a lot of room for learning and evolving as you go. And maybe the two most important pieces of that are, don't let your ego get in the way. You can't really listen and learn if your ego's in the way, and also never say die. Like your attitude just has to be, I'm just going to figure this out. I'm not going to quit.
Is that the element of bravery? Because I'm interested in the idea of, you spoke earlier about the risk, the idea of you learned a lot about risk and you're willing to take risk. What does that bravery look like when it shows up year 7 of your 12-year journey to get to profitability?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's, I suppose, different kinds of courage or bravery. And not, we could probably try to parse out what the difference is between bravery and courage. But I think what matters here is I'm looking to live an adventurous life. Like I see a lot of value in trying to live adventurously, as in I'm going to make my own path. I'm going to head out into some spaces where I don't know exactly what it's going to look like or how I'm going to get there. And I know that that's going to force me to be really present. It's going to force me to use my brains, to use my body, to use the people around me, to build a great team, to learn how to cooperate. It's just, I think adventure truly brings out the best in us. But the piece of bravery there is knowing that there's a lot of unknown and going anyway. And I think that's, in a lot of ways, that's counter to our human nature. Like the unknown is terrifying. And I think that's where bravery comes in. I think there's a foolhardy kind of bravery where it's like, well, actually, I kind of know that's going to be bad. And I'm going to do it anyway. That's a different thing. I think this is like, I think I can do this. I think I've got a good idea. I think I've got the right people. I know ultimately what I want to achieve. I know what my values are going to be. Yeah, there's a bunch of black boxes here. There's going to be a bunch of things we have to figure out. But I'm confident, as rationally as I can be, that I've got the right tools and resources and attitude to solve that. So I'm going to go for it. That's the kind of bravery that I think matters here.
I suppose that's the keeping your ego in check, as you mentioned. That's the type of bravery, right? Because if you know it's slightly dumb and very risky, but you still want to do it because there's some ego box on the other side that you want to check, yeah, that's going to push you to the next.
Yeah, that's right. And I think too, it ties back to this idea of sort of putting your work on the wall and letting it be critiqued. Your ego makes you want to defend, say this thing's precious. There's a reason why I did everything. Like I've got an excuse for all of it. I think the key in my experience, literally in outdoor adventures, and certainly in my experience here is, your best chance of success, your best chance of staying safe is put aside your concerns about how you look to others. Really don't be too wedded to the plans you came in with. Really listen to the people around you, keep that wide angle vision, try to really keep perspective on stuff. And as best you can, it's hard to grow and adapt, but I think as best you can, continue to grow and adapt.
It's interesting you say that about the 12 years and $10 million and that idea of not being too concerned about what other people are saying, maybe around you or behind you. Because the question I had for you is, I remember NEMO coming on the scene in the first few years, and there was an obvious innovation, and you were there, and there was a presence, and it looked like, oh, this is a brand that's growing. But then something happened. It seemed like maybe that was that year of profitability or somewhere around there that, it's kind of the classic overnight success, 10 years in the making, or I guess in your case, overnight success, 12 years in the making. That seemed like NEMO catapulted into a different level of business. I could be wrong. This is just outsider's perspective. I could be completely wrong. But from outsider's perspective, that's what it seemed like. Did you experience like a pretty massive growth somewhere in that zone? And what would you attribute that growth to?
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting, Christian, that you say that. It's not the first time that I've heard that, but the numbers actually don't prove that out. Like the numbers show that we've grown steadily kind of over these years with some disruptions up and down through the pandemic. The last 4 or 5 years have been a little crazy, but basically our growth curve has not been a hockey stick. It's been this pretty steady uphill climb, but I'm not saying you're wrong, because there's sort of a lot that's between what I look at in top line sales figures and what you're perceiving as say a customer or someone interested in the brand. And maybe there were certain things that we achieved around that time frame, a certain level of press attention or a certain frequency of being in stores, a certain depth of the product line, assortment in a store, or we showed up at a certain account for you that really signifies credibility. I don't know, but what it makes me think though is I definitely in the early days, I kind of dreamed of sort of when we'd have our or Malcolm Gladwell tipping point kind of moment. Like, when are we going to have, when's the day where that big thing's going to happen and suddenly we're going to be a household name? And we have never had any huge lucky break dropped in our lap. Like, I would say our successes have been hard earned and patiently earned over the years. But I actually, and of course, there are other small companies that are similar to us in many ways, and they have that lucky viral thing happen on social media, or maybe they do a high profile partnership or something, and all of a sudden they're known. But I actually think that it's kind of, I think, and maybe I'm just going to tell myself the story, that it signifies something good that I'd like to be proud of, which is, again, from the start, we have had this vision of, we want to build a lasting and iconic brand. Our goal is to be a family-owned business. We've been steadily buying out the outside investment we needed over the years with the goal of being 100% family-owned and running the business the way we want for however long we want. That's very different than a lot of other brands in the consumer marketplace and within our industry. There's been a lot of consolidation. There's a lot of private equity involved in our industry brands today. There's a lot of brands that roll up to publicly traded companies. In my experience, when we look out as NEMO into the market and all of a sudden a brand is shown up with like completely new packaging or like a big ad campaign or whatever, what's actually going on there is they just took a huge infusion of cash from a new investor who now needs to double or triple the size of the company in the next few years. For us, we're bootstrapping it. I mean, yes, we took investment, but that investment was to buy inventory. We have done incredibly little advertising over the years. Like, we put our dollars into making the best products we can and then hope that those appeal to customers and they spread the word, or you win awards and things like that. And Editor's Choice that spread the word. That's a patient, organic growth. Like, we have not had millions of dollars to go high. We've, in fact, never hired a big branding agency or marketing agency. I've never done a big ad campaign. So it's been trucking along in a patient kind of way. And I'm good with that.
That's great. I love it. It's so refreshing. I really appreciate that. And I knew, for this first time I talked to you, Cam, I knew there would be kindred spirits on that front. I really appreciate that. And something I've been thinking about a lot lately is consistency is better than intensity.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And just keeping that consistency over time and letting compounding take place and being patient for that. It doesn't seem to come naturally, or maybe it does come naturally, but everything in our society is doing everything to fight against that natural consistency and to aim for intensities. I applaud you for that. And it's wonderful. There's a lot of strength and just freedom that comes with being able to play the consistent game over time.
Yeah. If you don't mind, Christian, can I draft on that for 1 second?
God, please.
I think it relates to something else that you may ask me about in terms of maybe lessons I've learned along the way and kind of why we're doing this. And I would say, I thought a lot about kind of the difference between worrying about how you do something and how much you do. And so in other words, like, there's a lot of how much around me. Like, we of course have an accounting and finance team and a sales organization, and we look at weekly management reports, and we have all the usual business metrics of top line and gross profit margin and expenses and bottom line and so on. And then countless other more esoteric metrics and things. All that's great. And then of course there's compensation and how much we make and how many, that's on a personal level, and maybe as a company level, like how many SKUs we have and how many stores we're in and all this kind of how much. And I find that matters. It matters to me in the sense that I'm a very competitive person, and this is the field on which we're playing the game. Like this is the nature of the game. But at the end of the day, the how we do things, not the how much of it we do, is so much more emotional impact on me. In other words, I've learned over the years, if there's a rift here on a personal level, if I'm not getting along with someone or we have a quote HR challenge here, that eats at me and cancels out any other positive. And on the other hand, if morale is strong here, if we've got a great culture, if I can really feel like people on the NEMO team and our customers are having a good life because of what we're doing, that's the feeling that produces this profound, good feeling that I take home with me at night that puts me to sleep a lot faster. And I think part of it for us, there have been a lot of opportunities in 22 years to take a shortcut, to make a cheaper thing, to move down market, to do something in a sloppier way or whatever. So many junctures along the way where we could have taken a different path, and maybe our how muches would be bigger and more impressive. But we stuck to our values, and we hold ourselves to account for operating with integrity on every level, and places you'll never see, customer will never see. That's what we take home with us, and it feels good. It feels better to me. It's more important. It leads to a richer life, I think, than how much. And then, of course, the truth is, in the end, I think when you really focus on the how much, on the how much works out pretty well too.
Yeah, that's very good. I love the how versus the how much. And it's so true. When you focus on those things, the how much will follow it. It'll take care of itself. NEMO's perspective on design and making innovative products is at the forefront from the consumer's perspective, and that's very obvious. And there's a design philosophy at NEMO that guides the product development to make sure that every product improves the experience of your customers. I'm curious what that process looks like from the initial concept, here's an idea, into bringing it to market. And I thought an interesting way to maybe help us understand what that looks like is to take a product that you came out with recently that seems like a good example of what, because it's new and innovative, and that's the Stargaze chair. So maybe take the Stargaze chair and kind of work us through as what design innovation looks like from NEMO's perspective.
Yeah, and that is a good example. I think I love that chair, and it symbolized a lot for us. That the process with Stargaze began around 2012. I did a little sketch of basically taking a hammock and kind of putting it in the form factor of a chair. Like, my thought, hammocks were really big in the market at the time, and we were designing some hammocks. I was using hammocks in order to be a better kind of designer of them. And I couldn't sleep well in a hammock because I just find my back would be destroyed by morning. But I really enjoyed taking a nap in it, sitting in it, just that dynamic feeling of it. And I thought, man, it'd be cool if you could capture some of the essence of that in something that packed up like a chair, or was transportable like a chair I could bring to a campfire. And so I did a sketch. I made a really crude prototype in our shop with actually a bot, like, swinging chair for your patio, like something you would hang from, say, a hook on your patio. I kind of captured that in a really crude frame. None of it was even strong enough to really sit in without kind of exploding, but it was enough for our team to kind of convey the concept and capture the imagination. And so we said, well, this is something we got to do, but also we don't have the right talent on our team to tackle this specific project. We're going to have to shelve this right now, because we were tent designers, sleeping bag designers, sleeping pad designers, and furniture has a bit different set of kind of engineering constraints and demands and stuff. So we parked it for a little bit until a little further down the road, we ended up hiring a Harvard PhD engineer who got off to GE and a designer out of Apple to come and kind of supplement the team and really focus on that chair. And the three of us together took it to market in late 2017. We had a forecast, and I'll get back to the process in a second, but we had a forecast. It was $225, I think, retail when we launched it. The most expensive chairs were mid-$100. Most chairs were well under $100. So it was vastly more expensive. And our margin was tiny in that. I mean, it was a very expensive chair to make. And so with all that in mind, I thought, well, we'll be lucky if we sell 4,000 of them, which, by the way, would take about 10 years to pay off the tooling costs. You should never get all the R&D time, but we sold over 40,000 of them in the first year. So it turned out it was a great kind of validation of truly make a different and better experience for the customer. And you can charge what you need to charge for it, and the customer will reward you. But going back to the process, something I left out in the history that I'll just pull in real quick to illustrate where I'm going is when I was at RISD, after I interned at Black Diamond, I was in a partner studio with MIT, and we had a guest critic whose life partner and the critic were part of a NASA-funded project at MIT to redesign spacesuits. And this person was impressed with the project I did and invited me to submit my portfolio. And I ended up working for a couple of years with this team on redesigning spacesuits. And the woman in charge of the project was Dr. Deva Newman, who was this really fantastic professor in the aeroastro department at MIT, who'd grown up out west in the mountains, was as much a mountaineer and outdoors person as a great engineer. And I learned a lot of things from her. It was a fascinating project to be part of. But one of the things that she talked about having a life partner who was an industrial designer was the difference between engineering and design. And the way she saw it, engineers are experts in a linear thought process, and designers are talented in a lateral thought process. And a way I kind of visualize that and sort of visualize the design process at NEMO is if you kind of picture like the plastic funnel that you would use to pour gas into your lawnmower, and then imagine holding another one of those funnels on top of it, and then say another one on top of it and another one on top of it in succession. That's kind of how we want to flow an idea or flow ideas through our process. So at the outset of a project, we're trying to kind of fill the right part of the funnel. Like we tap into our creative abilities. And that's really where designers shine, is like looking out to the sides, and thinking from a different perspective. Like, what if we did it this way? Or what if it had this feature? Or what if we throw all that away and we're like this, And then once you sort of fill the top part of the funnel, you have to make this deductive, rational down select process to say, sort of measuring against some constraints, some engineering parameters and things. You got to say, well, this idea, that wouldn't accomplish this part, and this thing, that wouldn't work because of this, that's not manufacturable. And so you take a few of those things and you move your way down that funnel until you get a couple of ideas that feel like they're worthy of, say, making a CAD model or worthy of building a quick prototype. And then the process of now making that CAD model and looking at that thing in a totally different way now launches another lateral process. And you go through that same process again. Eventually you're making a prototype, and then your linear process involves really rigorous testing and things like that further kind of perfect that thing. But you're over and over again looking for chances to stop and kind of look out to the side. And that, I would say, is exactly how it's incredibly rare that a fully baked great design just comes to anyone. Like, often a great concept will come to someone. I mean, that's usually where the process kind of kicks off, is like a rough idea. But a fully baked design requires that iterative process, in my experience. And so Stargaze and everything else that we've made over the years that has turned out to be a good product has gone through that, where we're brainstorming for a bit. There's a bunch of out there ideas. We sort of measure them against goals and constraints, down select. When we made Chase down, we're in the process of this right now with a new chair we're designing. We spent months down a road that finally, in one of those linear processes, the concept just simply failed in testing. We couldn't make it strong enough and manufacturable enough the way we originally wanted to do it. And we had to hit the brakes, look way out to the side, sort of throw out don't treat that as precious, throw out that initial idea and think about some whole different ways. And where the chair will end up is quite far from where it started, but I think will turn out to be a great design.
I have two questions that came up when you were saying that. And one of them is, how do you know when it's done? And that may just be completely obvious for a designer and not a noob like me. So how do you know when something is done? And then how do you deal with the balance or the tension between those original ideas of where you think it could go and allowing it to go the course that it needs to go?
Well, first of all, I think the reason why that's a puzzling question is because the answer is it's never done. And I think it's true. And that's not to be cute. I mean, look at some of the iconic human designed things over the, in our history, like something that pops into mind is the Porsche 911. Like I don't know what year that car first launched, but I think it was mid 19th century. It's got to be on its 60, 70th year, somewhere in that ballpark. It's a continuing evolution. And I think, so first of all, I think in engineer, part of what sort of defines the lateral versus the linear is the linear process is kind of solving an equation. Like in engineering, there is sort of one solution to any given problem set. You may be asking yourself the wrong question, and so you get to the wrong answer. But if you think about math or physics, there is a right answer to the equation. But as soon as you involve aesthetics, form, subjective taste, or taste that is timely, that fits into society and culture and norms and trends today, those are dynamic, hard to quantify, hard to measure, hard to pin down things with arguably many different workable solutions. So even if NEMO or any other brand out there made a fully resolved, perfect design for 2024, will it still be for 2025? So I think the answer is the process never ends. And for us as a company, we find if we're lucky, we get sort of 3 years in the current marketplace before the consumer is like, show me something new. And that may be unfortunate on some levels, but I think that's kind of the reality.
Yeah. Shifting gears just a little bit from the design, NEMO's made big strides in sustainability, and you've made it a priority, and you have some ambitious goals for the future. How do you approach sustainability from a design and innovation perspective?
Yeah, this is something weighing heavily on us for the last few years, especially. I think our commitment to quote sustainability goes all the way back to when I was in school. And I remember a classmate or a teacher saying at some point, industrial design is really about learning to make things for mass production, and just cringing at the words mass production. And in school, thinking of myself as kind of a budding artist and craftsman, not someone wanting to mass produce things. But that is what we do, right? We do production runs of things. And anyway, that weighed on me when I was 20 something and kind of working on the original business plan for NEMO. And the way I resolved that in my head was I thought, okay, if we're going to quote mass produce something, then we have to feel like that thing deserves its place in the world. So NEMO will never make something the same as what's out there. If we're going to make something, it has to improve the experience for the customer. That has remained a mantra for us until today. The other part was, let's be really thoughtful. First of all, let's make the highest quality thing we can, because anything else sustainability-wise you might do sort of falls second to that. Make a thing that lasts. If you don't have to throw it away, that's the best place to begin with. And then let's be very thoughtful about the materials and processes we use. And I didn't know enough about manufacturing in the early days to really control that very much. So we focused in the beginning on making the best quality stuff we can, making truly innovative, differentiated things. And we did various things over the years. In the beginning, in the name of sustainability, we had some problems with our first production run. Instead of throwing that stuff out, we ended up, some years later, had this brainstorm, realized we could cut that up and resew it into little giveaways for our trade shows instead of doing what other people are doing, like koozies and stuff like that. We made the first bamboo tent pole set, which was actually totally functional, but just way too expensive to be marketable. We made the first recycled tents. A lot of various efforts in the early days. But come 2020, I was on the board of directors of our industry trade association and chair of sustainable business innovation. So my board responsibility was to kind of oversee the industry trade association's work on climate change and kind of setting industry climate change goals. And I learned so much from that. I went in with little expertise around a lot of that and had to really learn in order to help make good decisions. And so I'd come back to NEMO reflecting the conversations that we were having as a trade association. And so in the early part of 2020, I wrote a memo that lives here on the wall next to me to our product team and said, hey, what if we were, just hypothetically, what if we were to skip the halfway steps and actually make truly sustainable product? Like what might that look like? And what I said in the memo is, I think it would have to have zero carbon footprint, zero waste, and be fully recyclable. And it was meant to just be a challenge to the product team and sort of nudge us in that direction. But the product team came back and said, this is awesome. Let's do this. Like, we can do this. And so in 2020, we did two things. We started our Endless Promise program, which is to make recyclable product and move in this direction of making truly sustainable product. And we also had a big global test agency called Qantas benchmark our corporate footprint, measure our corporate footprint. And we publicly committed that within 10 years, we would cut in half our carbon intensity, so that the amount of carbon it takes to make our products, on average, we would cut in half. And which, by the way, means it gave us like 2 or 3 development cycles of a product to be able to somehow have the carbon it takes to make it. Last year, 3 years in, Qantas measured our footprint as already having reduced 36% toward that 50% 10-year goal. So it's something that and last year we launched our first Endless Promise products. We picked instead of picking a little incidental, marginalized product that we make 10 of, we picked our Forte sleeping bag, one of our most selling products, and made that the first recyclable sleeping bag. And then this year we launched packs that are fully recyclable. Long answer to the question, but it's something that, the way we talk about it here is not as sustainability. And that's why I air quoted sustainability. We talk about it as business sustainability. So we are a for-profit company. We make stuff. So in the first place, we have a footprint, and we have to kind of live with that if we're going to keep being a brand that makes things. But at the same time, we're a majority family-owned business with a long-range set of goals, primary of which is to make a lasting and iconic brand. And I simply don't believe, and everyone here agrees with me, that we will fulfill that goal, that we have a long-term future, if we don't take this stuff seriously and we don't take responsibility as a company for our outputs. I mean, we fundamentally make things for being outdoors. We have to protect the planet for there to be places to do this stuff. And I also think between the demands, the changing, evolving demands of customers and shifting regulations, you're not going to be able to run a business 5-10 years from now without taking this stuff seriously. So we look at it as, yeah, there's a moral imperative to do this. Absolutely. But there's also some very practical reasons. And when you put that together, I think crazy to not be pursuing this stuff full speed.
Wow. You're obviously a very thoughtful and values-driven leader, and I really appreciate that. And so my question for you is, how have you changed as a leader and a CEO and founder throughout your tenure at NEMO, from scrappy startup to large internationally recognized brand?
Yeah, first of all, I hope I continue to become a better leader. I hope to keep changing and growing. I think the way I look at it so far is, when I started NEMO as 20-something years old, when I watched Braveheart in college, that was, maybe if I look back in my life, that was the movie that had the biggest emotional impact on me of any movie. There were some others, but I remember watching that and it just plucked every heartstring in my 20-something-year-old testosterone-driven mind. And I think in some ways I took the picture of William Wallace bloody and charging out ahead of his army with me as I started NEMO as sort of a model of leadership. And I think I felt in the beginning, I'm young, I've got a lot to prove here. Why would anyone follow me if I'm ever wrong, or if I ever show any fear or weakness? I think I was very self-conscious that way. And I think I felt like I've got to always have the answer. I have to always say something smart in every discussion. And we had sort of an existential moment as a company a year before the pandemic. We made a big mistake in our ordering and planning for the upcoming year and ordered vastly less than what we actually needed for sales. Long story, kind of how it happened. But in the end, I attributed it to basically entirely to my own failure, which was in creating the kind of culture where anyone could come to me or anyone else and say they saw a problem and not feel any fear or guilt or shame or feel like they were throwing someone else under the bus, but see that as just part of us all putting our heads together to try to do the best job we can here and really trusting each other that way. And so I I recognized that I had made the wrong culture, that it almost killed the business. Some people saw that that problem was happening, didn't say something for various reasons. And so we really kind of we really set about to think hard about how to make a successful culture here, and went on a journey there that involves bringing in some great people to talk to us, reading some books, doing a lot of internal discussions. And the way I look at it today, and by the way, Brene Brown's Dare to Lead was probably the single most impactful book in that sort of journey. Strongly recommend that to everyone. And there's something I think to be gained from that for every human being. But out of that, I guess the simplest way I can put it is, instead of feeling like I need to say something smart in a meeting, what I try to do is just make sure that the smart thing gets said. And that really sort of shifts the focus on me to making sure that the people around me are supported in the right way to bring the best out in them. And then they feel the trust and confidence that they need to speak up and always say what's on their mind. And I think the result of that is we've got a collective intelligence here that's far greater than mine alone, far greater than anyone's alone. And that's an interesting benefit that's come out of that is I've also found the more I worry about other people, the less my problems weigh on me. And so it's been kind of paradoxically stress relieving to shift from thinking about how do I look to, is this team well taken care of? How are these people doing? It's a load off in a weird way.
Good for you, Cam. That's a big step. That's huge. There's a lot of people who go through their whole life and never are able to take those steps, especially leading a large organization. So good for you. I'm sure the people that work with you can feel that change too.
Thanks.
Established brands are still innovating, but just like the early days of NEMO, there are makers out there right now in garages and basements working on innovative products. Crowdfunding and social media and e-commerce has allowed them all to, have a chance. What would your advice be to those makers that are in the garages and basements right now?
I think we've covered some key ingredients, but I think maybe to tie some of that together, I think that the things that you have to have as you kind of set out on this adventure are a vision of where you want it to go, an idea of what success is for you. And I think, just a quick side note on that, when I started NEMO, I think the way I thought I would measure success was, say, in millions of dollars of top line, or in number of retail accounts, or number of countries we're in, or whatever. A few years into NEMO, I realized a much safer way to look at it in terms of, if this thing fails, will I have judged it a meaningful use of my time in my life? Have I had a meaningful adventure? Have I made great memories? Have I positively affected other people? And there was a point a few years in, I remember having this very conscious moment. You know what? If the business fails now, it's been totally worth it anyway. Like, I have learned so much. I've met some amazing people. We've had some really cool employees who've come in and done awesome things. They've enjoyed this adventure. Like, we've also accomplished some cool stuff. So I think, first of all, when you're setting that vision and that goals, be careful what the goals are, because they can be really superficial and actually really hard to attain, or they can be maybe a little bit deeper and more personal and actually more achievable. If it's really about making memories, I think or learning, growing, that's easier and more likely to be successful than financially successful. And then I think it's so much about success is so much about the people you put around you. And someone early on in NEMO said to me, what do you have for a challenge network? I was like, challenge network? And that's another thing I've thought a lot about, because it's easy to put people around you who pat you on the back and tell you you're great and give you support. That would be a sort of a support network. But I benefited a lot more over the years from people around me who just told me what's actually going on, and weren't afraid to say that there's food on your face, or is that really the right way to do that? And a very material example for me is, this is not personal, but more to do with sort of the strategy of the business. Back in 2012, we actually intended to launch backpacks and sleeping bags at the same time. And a guy who's become a very close friend and advisor and kind of partnered in NEMO, he runs the biggest sales agency we work with, said to me, "You're freaking crazy, man. You're way too small a brand to launch 2 categories at once. Like, pick one, And then later on, when we chose sleeping bags and we brought them to our biggest retail account and they gave us a lukewarm response, the same guy said, "Here's what you got to do. Take all those salesman samples you made, go to your Facebook page, round up 100 people to test them, forget selling anything next year, and just take the year and really learn from the customer, evolve the designs, and we'll come back and we'll have this meeting again next year." And that was a hard thing to hear. He was exactly right. When we ended up launching sleeping bags a year later than planned, they became 1/3 of the business in the first year. So I think you got to put people around you that challenge you. And then the last thing I would say is all of that, everything about it should be malleable. You should regularly question it, challenge it, iterate it, evolve it, with the one exception of that vision and mission. Like that's the North Star. Like there's got to be, it's like that funnel process. You got to have something you're measuring against, and I think as you learn and grow and evolve, you want to be looking at that North Star for direction and guidance and just questioning, is this way that we're changing? Is this decision that we're facing, this thing that we're about to do, how does it measure up against our values and our goals?
You've touched on this a little bit in your previous answer, but I always end the podcast with this question. And so if it's a repeat, that's okay, because I'm always curious to hear what people say is, how do you measure success for yourself?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. I think I teased at this earlier, but in a couple of things that we talked about. But for me, it's a life lived adventurously. I recognize not everyone shares this mindset, but I've always wanted to be different. Like I've always had a lot of fear that I would just be normal. And maybe that's neurotic, but I want to make my own path. So I think when I look back and judge what I've done, some of it is going to be, did I design, if you will, my own life that suits me? But I think part of that, what I'm looking for in that kind of design of life is rich with human connections. I think there's nothing more emotionally rewarding than how we connect with people. And I want some of those to be supporting relationships and some of those to be challenging relationships. I also want my adventure to include a lot of mind expanding experiences. And I want some of those to be wins and some of those to be losses, some of those to be failures. And something I've thought a lot about with the passing of my mom earlier this year and just watching that journey as she fought cancer for the last few years and now kind of how my dad deals with that. I want to accumulate lasting memories. I think that's the thing that we carry with us. And I think when I was younger, I was kind of living much more for the moment and living for myself. And as I get a little bit wiser, I'm learning it's a lot more rewarding to live for others and live for the memories that we carry.
I wish you that success, Cam. I've really appreciated this conversation, your experiences and being willing to share them with us. It's been wonderful to hear more from you and get to know you a little bit more. So I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Well, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate the chance to share some of that.
Thanks so much for listening all the way to the end of this podcast. If you enjoyed it, please share it with a friend you think may enjoy it too. Sharing goes a long way. You can also take a few seconds to subscribe to the podcast. Anything you do to help share the love here, we'd appreciate it. Thanks so much for following along, and we'll see you next time.